You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's up, Los Angeles? Los Angeles Football Network here. Welcome back from the break. If you're on radio, this is the LA Football Show right here on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio, always on the LA Football Network, brought to you as always by our friends at BetOnline. Use that promo code BELIEVE for a 50% welcome bonus. This is the UCLA Bruins segment, or UCLA Bruins show portion if you're on podcast or video platform. I'm your host, Ryan Doward, joined as always as the madman Jamal Madney. Excited to get into this chat. We just wrapped up USC's preview against Colorado in the first segment of the show, and now we get UCLA against Arizona. Also 8-1 UCLA is. Got snubbed in the College Football Committee playoff, which let's start with that, Jamal. Let's not even get to this game yet. UCLA has a better resume than many teams in front of them. They get a big win over ASU last week. Granted, ASU is, not a great team. They fired their coach or whatever, but it's still a conference game, an away game that they had to play in the desert at a late start, and you rush the football for 400 yards, and this team stays at 12. How disrespectful is that to UCLA, Jamal?
Pretty disrespectful, Ryan. I mean, when you look at the teams ahead of UCLA, a Clemson team that just got stomped by Notre Dame, when you look at the fact that, granted, LSU beat Alabama, but they still have 2 losses on the season. UCLA only has 1. And then, truth be told, even the friends across town at USC have 0 top 25 victories, and UCLA has 2 top 25 victories, which is only second in the nation to Tennessee, and they have 3 top 25 victories. So for all of those reasons, some very puzzling choices ahead of UCLA. You can't help but feel this is a little bit personal when you look at the athletic director of NC State being the chair of the CFP committee this year. And we all know last year there was quite a bit of bad blood between NC State's athletic department and administration and UCLA, with UCLA having to pull out of that Holiday Bowl game day of due to COVID-19 reasons. And NC State was very verbal, very adamant, very vocal about their unhappiness with that. And it feels like there's some residual ill will carrying over there.
Yeah, it absolutely feels like that. And we want to hear from you. Text UCLA to 31032. Let us know, how disrespectful is it that UCLA is still ranked 12th in the country? This committee was made, Jamal, with the purpose, 13 members or something, of having enough checks and balances to where it could take you still have the human element, but it would be a more thought-provoking than the BCS system, a computer system. But that's just the thing. You still have the human element, and you recognize that with the NC State AD and some bad blood there potentially. Now, that if that is the case, which it certainly may be, that is, that person should never be on the committee again if they're actually basing their rankings on something that happened last year that really had nothing to do with on the football field. But that's the risk you take when you have these committees and you have human beings and all your committee members are from that region or that. How much do you think, and I think it's very real, and I'll answer after you, but how much do you think, too, this is the fact that UCLA plays 80% of their games when everyone's asleep?
Well, Ryan, you hit the nail on the head, right? Committees are a function of people, and whenever you have a group of people, you are going to have politics. That is just inherently human nature. And so think about putting yourself in that room, and if one person has a very strong opinion about one of these teams, i.e., let's call it the chair of the committee, the AD of NC State, and nobody else has as strong a counter opinion to that opinion because they haven't watched the games, because the games are 10:30 at night and ending at 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, then what do you think is going to happen? Obviously, that person that is demonstrating a strong opinion is going to win out, even whether it's a positive opinion or a negative opinion, when the rest of the committee doesn't have a strong opinion. So those are the things that Chip was alluding to a little bit with the fact that UCLA last week had 402 yards rushing and nobody was there to watch it, because it's hard to form a strong opinion around UCLA when no one is watching them. I think that Oregon is ranked where they are because of the narrative around them getting their doors blown off by Georgia week 1, and everyone's sort of monitoring how Bo Nix is doing, because you got to remember Bo Nix is an SEC kid. So there's still sort of that narrative media tie to him in the mainstream college football world, if we talk about mainstream college football being the South and the Midwest. And then when you look at it from SC's perspective, I think just Caleb Williams' brilliance over the course of this season, and that whole storyline with Lincoln Riley leaving, bringing Caleb along in the offseason, I think that has carried over into narrative cachet for folks to sort of monitor what's really going on with USC. And I think as a result of those things, they both just have more visibility because of the more off the field stuff. UCLA didn't have that storyline going in. The only storyline that UCLA has had going in have been all negative when it comes to the lack of attendance, the fact that they celebrated too hard against South Alabama, the fact that they're having such a hard time breaking away from the regents and the state with this Big Ten move. So human beings are a function of politics and media, just like everybody else. And UCLA has just kind of gotten the short end of the stick in terms of exposure. And even when they've gotten exposure, it's been negative. And so, that old saying goes, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Any publicity is good publicity. Well, I think in this particular case, that's not true for UCLA.
Yeah. And I don't, part of me doesn't care that much because you've mentioned it before. I think UCLA plays better with that underdog mentality and kind of the us against the world. And, oh, well, you're not going to watch us. Well, we'll show you, you'll have to watch us eventually, or we'll just keep winning quietly and doing it our way. That's kind of how Chip Kelly has always been. That's kind of how UCLA has always been. And now they're both together. And I think they strive for that. The only part that concerns me, Jamal, is, and I think it will play itself out and be okay, but even with the brilliance of this season, and let's say UCLA, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, we're going to talk about this Arizona game here in a minute, which is what's in front of us first. But let's say they win out, UCLA does. They beat USC, they beat Cal to finish the season, and they beat Oregon or whoever they end up playing in the Pac-12 title. They're, what does that put them? 12-1, 11-1 as a Pac-12 champion. I think that'll be enough to get in. But if those teams in front of them don't lose, then the committee, I can't see them jumping them. They would need a TCU to lose, or obviously Ohio State and Michigan play each other. They're sitting at 2-3 right now, but let's say that game is a 2-point game ending. Wouldn't shock me if the committee puts both of them in. You see the SEC always has a second team lingering where the committee says, oh, well, they weren't the champion, but hey, they're pretty damn good. We'll put them in. So I would just hate to see, because they're so far back right now, that even if they win out, even if they win the Pac-12 decisively, even if they're this great, great team, them finish at 5 or 6 just because they can't move up enough because the committee screwed them this late in the game. That's my only concern. I think it'll play itself out okay. I think it'll be okay, but that definitely has me worried.
No, Ryan, and it has me worried as well. And I think that really the only school, if you say UCLA wins out in terms of the rest of the regular season of the Pac-12 championship game, or USC wins out in terms of regular season Pac-12 championship game, or Oregon wins out in terms of the rest of the regular season Pac-12 championship game, who would have the best shot to get in? In my opinion, it's SC, because they have sort of that narrative element. They would play UCLA, they would play Notre Dame, and then they would play Oregon. So the resume would be very strong. I think the thing that hurts Oregon is just getting their doors blown off by Georgia to the extent that they did. I think there's enough people in that room where the stigma of that is still so strong. How can you win a national championship in any season that you lose a game by almost 7 touchdowns? It just feels so counterintuitive. So I think that really hurts Oregon. And I think what really hurts UCLA is starting at position 12 and having to jump. Only one team has made it to the college football playoff ranked as low as UCLA has been in the history of the CFP. That was Oklahoma at 10 a couple of years ago, but Oklahoma at 10 had made it to the CFP the previous 3 years. So there was already a name recognition there. So I completely agree with you. I think that is my concern as well. And I think ultimately it will play out because I believe it'll be Georgia, the winner of Ohio State, Michigan, Tennessee, TCU, and the Pac-12 champion. And I think it's going to be 4 are going to be picked out of those 5. So if TCU stumbles or Tennessee stumbles, I think it becomes a moot point. I think it only becomes dicey if neither of those teams stumble.
Yeah, exactly. So, and SC, to your point, if they make it that far, their only loss will be a 1-point loss on a 2-point conversion at the end of the game in Salt Lake City on a cold, raucous night. So I think that helps their resume in terms of quote unquote good losses. Whereas UCLA's wasn't terrible, at Outson Stadium in Oregon, ended up being a 15-point loss. It probably felt a little not as close as that, but it doesn't look terrible on paper. Whereas Oregon's loss looks atrocious on paper, but we'll see. We got to play the game still. We got to win. We got to take care of Arizona. It's frustrating because if that were to play out and with how magical the season can be, and if they get left out just due to the fact they started so far back for whatever reason, when SC, who obviously we cover, I love SC too, but when they move up a spot after barely beating Cal and UCLA stays put after putting up 50 and 400 yards on the ground at Arizona State. So interesting.
Right, the silver lining there, even if UCLA were to get hosed, is there is a school of thought and there is part of the fan base that would rather go to the Rose Bowl than be a 4 seed in the CFP and having to go up against Georgia. Mm-hmm. If this team goes up against Georgia, I love this team. This is one of my favorite UCLA teams of all time. I love UCLA. Everyone knows that. That's a hard one for even me to say that they're going to win that game or even be competitive in that game versus going to the Rose Bowl, which is so much more special to UCLA. It's been 37 years since UCLA's won the Rose Bowl, 24 years since they've been to the Rose Bowl. So in a lot of ways, winning the Rose Bowl and capping this season off 13-1 with the Rose Bowl championship, having beaten everybody you played because they would have avenged the Oregon loss, I think would hold so much significance in the minds and hearts of Bruin Nation, more so than potentially getting into the CFP and maybe losing in the semifinal and not really having any hardware at the end to show for it.
That's a great point. Yeah, and it would be a really fun game if it was, say, UCLA Michigan at the Rose Bowl. That would be a blast on New Year's Day that we will obviously be at. So either way, everything's in front of them. I think they got to take care of business on the field, and it starts this weekend at the Rose Bowl against Arizona. So let's look at this game, Jamal. And I circled this recently, kind of as I feel like we've had a lot of these lately, but as a potential trap game. The game before USC, are they overlooking and that? I don't think it's as much due to the fact that it's at the Rose Bowl. If this was in Tucson, I would be very, very worried about this game because Arizona, I know they got beat pretty bad last week at Utah. That game was in Utah. We all have talked about it. Utah's a great football team. I'm not taking anything away, but they're a very, very great football team at home. They're a decent team on the road. And obviously that game was at home. So it doesn't totally show that what that U of A program is and offensively what they can do. So that being said, though, I'm happy it's at the Rose Bowl because now it might not be the same U of A program that it would be at the Zona Zoo in Tucson. So your thoughts, though, going into this game on Saturday night?
Ryan, my biggest concern going into this game is health. And there's been a lot of questions at practice this week with basically everybody in the running back room. And Charbonnet obviously missed last week. He's been sort of in and out of practice, very light work. Keegan Jones has had very light to no work this week. Kazmeir Allen has had very light to no work this week. Even TJ Harden has had light to no work this week. So the only running back that is completely healthy, at least from a practice participation standpoint this week, is Colson Yankov. So as a result of that, I am concerned just with the state of the running back room. I think there's extra precaution here. I think if this was SC week, all those guys would play. But I think Chip, again, the chess master that he is, he wants to line up those pieces perfectly for next week. So I see a little bit more of a running back by committee approach on Saturday night with each player getting a little bit of run, but not too much, and really preserving health. And I also think that falls very much in line with this being the game that DTR really sort of unleashes the passing skills and hones the passing skills, because this is step 3 of rebuilding him after that Oregon loss, right? The Stanford game was just, hey, just go back out there, be composed, make all the simple plays, and let's really run the football and reset you mentally. Last week was all about, let's show off your athleticism running the football. And he was dancing around, waving to the crowds, jawing to the Sun Devils, hurdling, mini hurdling, doing all of those things, but he didn't really have to throw the ball that much. I think this is the week that Chip, in this natural progression of getting DTR to be humming for next week, is going to want him to throw the ball with more precision, more volume, and more accuracy and feel. And so I look for Bobo and Kam Brown and TMA and those guys to have a bigger game, and the running game kind of going by committee. DTR is going to keep some himself and kind of keep that clock rolling, keep that flow moving. And Arizona, very explosive. I expect Arizona to stay in this game, much like they did with USC for a couple of quarters, and then ultimately UCLA will pull away. But that's how I see this playing out.
Yeah, and to that, I really want to see a more involved game from Jake Bobo. Obviously, they didn't need him against Arizona State when you're running the ball so well as they did, to the tune of 402 yards. But if this one, like you mentioned, with the banged up of the running backs and the committee, and I don't think they're not going to be inept at running the football. This team is just great overall. But I would love to see Bobo get a really good primer game before that November 19th one, and kind of, he's had some very, very good moments. He's had some good overall games, but I wouldn't say he's had like the breakout game yet, where it's like, Jake Bobo, we see the big plays. Like when you need a 4th down conversion, you know where the ball's going, and he converts every time. When you need those touchdowns, he converts. He's had 2 touchdown games, but we haven't seen those 150-yard, 1 to 2 touchdown type games. And I think this would be a very good one to put on display before the November 19th game. So really excited to see what we can get from him, and really excited to see, like you said, DTR maybe aired out a little bit more, so then he has the full arsenal ready to go in a week and a half. So
yeah, Ryan, and just to that point about Bobo really quickly, he's had only 2 100-yard receiving games this season, to your point.
Yeah.
The peak of Jake Bobo was that Washington game, the 6 catches for 142 yards and the 2 touchdowns. The other 100-yard game he's had was against Oregon, where he went for 8 and 101. But honestly, Ryan, I don't really count that as much, because a lot of that was in garbage time in the 4th quarter, when the outcome of that game had been decided. About 70 of his 100 yards were in that 4th quarter when the outcome was decided. So I completely agree with you. This is the game to get Bobo over 100 yards, to really have his confidence going into SC week.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to see how that goes. So we got about 2 minutes or so. So let's get into some predictions at this one. 7:30 kickoff at the Rose Bowl. UCLA hosts Arizona. Obviously, I think we both unanimously think they will win this game, but give me a little analysis on, you broke down exactly what you think is going to happen in terms of what the offense will look like, but give me some actual like score predictions and whatnot, how this game ends.
Yeah, Ryan, I think offensively it's going to be another game of balance, but I'm going to make a bold prediction here that UCLA is going to have more passing yards than rushing yards in this game. I expect to see DTR having about, let's call it, between 275 and 300 through the air. And I think as a team, they're going to run for between 160 and 200 on the ground. I think it's going to be more of an aerial attack. 60% of the offense is going to be through the air. They're going to get about 500 yards. They're going to move it around without problem. I see this being 44-28 UCLA. Arizona's going to score. They got those 3 great receivers, McMillan, Stringer, Cowing. I mean, they're just absolutely phenomenal. Delora's terrific, but Delora will always give you 2 or 3 plays as a defense, either being loose with the ball in the backfield or throwing a couple balls up in the air for picks. UCLA will capitalize on that and really start pulling away late 2nd, early 3rd quarter, 44-28 UCLA, and then the party can really begin for 7 days getting ready for this victory belt.
Yeah, this is actually, when you kind of look at Arizona's offense, this is a great game to have right before the SC game, because they haven't up to this point, Jamal, really played that mobile of a quarterback. And the guy that was the most mobile, which really isn't that mobile, but who killed them, was Bo Nix. was really able to do stuff with his legs. And so now they play a Delora who can absolutely do more with his legs, very mobile, can evade pressure, can get outside the pocket, can turn third and longs into first downs with just his legs. And I think that's a good thing for this team because guess what? They got Caleb Williams, who might be the best at that in the conference the very next week. So it's going to be a good primer for that to get this defense ready. And I'm really interested to see, Jamal, whether they do a QB spy, how they change up the scheme a little bit to contain him, because when you also have the great 3 receivers you mentioned and a quarterback that can mobile, oh, guess what? That's what USC has too. So it's a great, great test for this defense. But I agree, UCLA's offense is just too good. I think DTR will go over 300 yards passing. Caleb Williams went over 420. So I think DTR goes over 3 to try to keep pace. They do get the win big. Like you mentioned, I'll go 45-20, a 25-point victory for the UCLA Bruins. That's all the time we have for this segment. Jamal Madden, I'm Ryan Dowd. We'll be back on radio at the top of the hour for some Chargers talk. For the podcast, thanks for tuning in. Talk to you guys all next week.